Good evening. My name is Deborah Cannon. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Clallam County, a nonpartisan, issues-focused organization. I'm the moderator for tonight's forum, focusing on Legislative District 24, Position 1. The forum is jointly sponsored by the Jefferson County League of Women Voters and the North Olympic Library System. Tonight's recorded forum will be posted on the League's Clallam website and YouTube channel in a few days in case you want to review specific answers or refer a friend. It's also being simulcast now by KPTZ in Jefferson County. We'll be sharing links with Jefferson County as well as Grays Harbor County. We thank the many volunteers who made this forum possible. Voting is the primary focus of the League. Ensuring voters know how to register, how to track their ballots, what the issues are, providing unbiased candidate information are all key to our mission, along with election observing. I appreciate you listening and taking an interest in being an informed voter. State legislators, they shape our daily public life and establish public policy for Washington State. They draft, debate, and vote on laws impacting areas such as public safety, education, health, transportation, and business regulation, to mention a few. They decide how tax revenue is collected and spent. They ensure state agencies properly implement laws. They act as a check and balance to other branches of government and assist their constituents in resolving issues with government services. Most importantly, they are the collective voice of their constituents, balancing many points of view. In this year's Legislative District 24 Position 1 race, there are 4 candidates. 3 have elected to participate tonight. I welcome Adam Bernbaum, Aiden Hamilton, and Eric Pratt. Thank you, gentlemen. Over the past week, we've received thoughtful questions from the community. In fact, close to 60 questions were submitted. Thank you for doing that. We're glad that there's interest in this race. We've done our best to combine overlapping questions in a way that allows us to cover as many topics as possible in a limited time frame. So we look forward to the candidates explaining how they will improve the lives of Washingtonians if they are elected. For their opening statement, we've asked each candidate to tell us why they're running for the legislative position, what their qualifications are for serving, and what their goals are while in office, including their top 3 priorities. Following the ballot order, we'll start with Mr. Pratt. Mr. Pratt, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, everyone, for putting this forum on. My name is Eric Pratt, candidate for the House of Representatives for Legislative District 24 for Position 1. I'm a lifelong resident, Jefferson County of District 24. I was born and raised in Port Townsend at Jefferson General Hospital. I graduated Port Townsend High School in 1997. I have always called Jefferson County and the Olympic Peninsula my home. And I come to you today as candidate for Legislative District 24 because I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a neighbor. And as a father, I want to do what's right for my children's future, what they need in education, and what their lives look like within our community. As a son, I'm here because I'm concerned about the cost of living for those on fixed incomes and the availability of health care in our district, and the proximity of family and our ability to stay close to our loved ones. I also sit here as a neighbor, concerned for the taxation and the long-term viability of our state fiscally and socially amid some turmoil that's since kind of come about the past few years through some of the legislation that's been passed. I'm a citizen advocate. I come to this as a regular man, a blue-collar man, single father of 2, who's just making his way through life and who cares about his community, the Olympic Peninsula, the great waters of the Puget Sound that we enjoy, the mountains of the Olympics, and the people, many of the people in this forum today. So I sit here and I'm here to learn and I'm here to listen and I'm here to share in changing Washington for the better, making sure our families have faith in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Mr. Bernbaum, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Adam Bernbaum, and I'm honored to be your state representative. I'm grateful to be participating in this forum. I know it takes a lot of effort to organize these events, and that the public and the candidates benefit from sharing ideas with each other. This is the first one of these that we've done this cycle. I wanted to give you a bit of a progress report on what I've been up to over the last couple years. I've spent the last 2 years focusing on solving problems in our community. I sponsored 6 bills that were passed into law. These include a law that makes it easier to build housing in rural communities, a government efficiency bill which realized savings in the Department of Licensing, a bill to expand access to childcare by removing unnecessary red tape, a bill that makes it easier to prevent wildfire with prescribed burn, and a permit appeal reform bill to spur economic development. I've also advocated in our budget writing process for our district. I helped secure appropriations to expand the sewer line in East Port Angeles, to reopen the road to the Hoh Rainforest, which was washed out at the beginning of 2025, to support low volume labor and delivery services at Jefferson Healthcare, and complete the rail grade separation on US 12, which is vital for the Port of Grace Harbor. I know there's still so much more to do. The cost of gas and groceries are too high. Too many young families can't afford homes, and the cost of affordability of healthcare in particular is under acute strain. Moreover, we live in divisive political times. Something I've always loved about local politics is that it's an opportunity for us to work on issues that are community issues. We all want to live in a healthy and prosperous community. We all want good schools, a thriving economy, and clean air and water. These are not Democratic or Republican issues. These are community issues. And if you send me back to Olympia, my promise to you is that I will listen to all voices and work toward compromise, that I will put policy before factionalism, and that I will be a tireless advocate for the people who live on the Olympic Peninsula. It has truly been the honor of my lifetime to serve you for the last 2 years, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Hello. I want to first off and start by echoing what my friends and opponents have said, which is that we're very grateful to be participating in this forum. As referenced, and people can see, my name is Aiden Hamilton, and I was born and raised on this Olympic Peninsula. And I'm running because, in truth, I'm scared. I'm scared of what I'm seeing come down from Olympia, and I'm scared of what I'm seeing here in my local community. When I'm talking to young folks, it's not. You're used to the idea that sometimes you don't just get to stay where you necessarily grow up, and sometimes you have to move away for opportunities, and you look forward to coming back. But when people are talking about leaving our local communities, they're not talking about going to Seattle for opportunity. They're talking about leaving the state with no intentions of coming back. And that's what concerns me now, is because our district and our state cannot function if people are leaving, and people who want to stay are being forced to leave. And so I come just as a student of the pandemic. One of the big reasons I decided to run was because of what we're seeing when it comes to education. We're seeing kind of a shift in post-COVID education. And one of the things that I've often said is that not one legislator can look a student in the eyes and say, I know what it's like to lose 2 years of my education to a pandemic. If elected, I would be the first and the only legislator who could do so. And that is a large part of what's informed my opinion. When we look not just to education, but to the issues surrounding our state, what we see is that the Democrats have held a trifecta in the legislature for 25 of the last 40 years. They've had absolute power, which means when we're talking about an issue, if the Democrats, they've had their way, which means we need to be talking about issues that Democrats said they fixed. Can they say that they fixed education? I don't think so. Can they say they fixed public safety? I don't think so. When we look to these issues, what we're not looking about or looking at is an individual member of the Democratic caucus's preferences. We're looking to the leadership of the Democratic caucus and what they've said. And what we need to understand is that ultimately a member of the majority party will be forced and pulled into voting in line with the rest of the party.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. We'll move on to the first set of questions, which focus on infrastructure and growth. What specific industries should Washington invest in to create jobs in LD24, and why? Mr. Bernbaum, you have 90 seconds to answer.
Thanks, Deb. So I'm going to cover a couple industries to start. one of the things that's conspicuous about the 24th LD is we have, I believe, the most coastline of any legislative district in the state. We have a huge opportunity to do more to support our maritime sector. I want to make sure that there are people who can get jobs working, repairing the aluminum hold vessels in Port Angeles, wooden hold vessels in Port Townsend. These are well-paying jobs that if we are effective and successful at supporting, a person can work right out of high school, and that they can support a family on. So that's one of the places that I think we can do more to focus. There's been a couple policies that we passed in Olympia that have done that. There's an appropriation that I helped get into the budget to reduce the cost for people that don't have the money to get their a certificate that you need to work in a sailors union. I was proud to help the Sailors Union of the Pacific on that priority. Um, Okay, so that's the maritime sector. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the forest product sector. I think that there's been some fantastic work that Colleen McAleer has been working on at the EDC to make sure that we have a thriving and prosperous forest product sector. We've gotten some fantastic support from federal partners to this direction. While we don't have the same strength of timber industry that we used to have, there's a lot of work in particular if we're looking at timber laminate products, the work that CRTC is doing that could allow us to be a genuine leader, not just in our state, but nationally in this space. So that's a place that I've been working so far. And then I'm going to continue to work on in Olympia. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying a lot of what Adam said is correct, and it's a good place to start. So just kind of expanding on much of what he said, I think what I would touch on is thinking about the local college here. Up in Port Angeles, we have the Peninsula College, and I remember sitting down with them and talking to them about some of the issues that they're facing. One of the things I noticed was that they have a lot of technical education focused on the economy and economic growth here on the North Olympic Peninsula. And so one of the first things I think to how can we kind of expand and focus on a lot of what's going on here is going towards that college and seeing what we can do to help them out. Because, I mean, they have a lot of opportunities that focus on our local workforce education. So I think focusing on that in addition to other things, similar to what Adam said, is I think that's kind of the goal. And so lately, I remember one of the last things they told me that they were facing was a bit of a budget hamstring. A lot of us, not just here on the Olympic Peninsula, but also just across the state, a lot of us are dealing with major budget crises. Everybody from our local city governments to school boards, everyone's dealing with a massive budget crisis. And so that's kind of what is driving my concern here is I want to help the college because I think they have a really great opportunity. A lot of people, I think that there's a lot of correctness because there's a lot of correctness when it comes to the approach that believing that college can end up leading to economic opportunity, and it can also attach something to an individual's resume that down the line, maybe they don't stay on the Olympic Peninsula, but they seek another job opportunity, and that'll help the individual best of all.
Thank you. Mr. Pratt?
Yes, thank you. LD24, the Olympic Peninsula, has a plethora of opportunities. Both Port Townsend and Port Angeles are keyed up to be amazing components of the maritime industry in Puget Sound. I mean, they already are. So facilitating the expansion for both of those areas, I think is going to be critical. So anything we can do to help deregulate and streamline the performance of those businesses in maritime manufacturing or maritime maintenance, for our Puget Sound fleet and fleets coming down from Alaska, I think is going to be a net positive for our community as a whole. Excuse me. We also need to build on our foundations, right? Forestry. Throughout Legislative District 24, forestry has always been a critical component of who we are. I think some of the changes with Rayonier sort of moving out of the area, some of the new players coming into effect need to be handled a little better and in conjunction with community needs for jobs. Additionally, I want to say the Washington Tourism and Marketing Authority has really been helping things along for tourism. We live in an amazing, beautiful place. And I think we need to continue to expand on that because I think that's going to go a long way to help our economy and our ecology locally.
Thank you. What will you do to ensure rural healthcare providers remain viable after federal cuts to Medicaid? Mr. Hamilton, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Yeah, so one of the first things is that we have to do everything we can here just at the state level to make sure that we're kind of taking care of the community and the needs. There's a lot of concerns about what's going on with rural hospitals, and that's something that I myself am also concerned about. But one of the first things that I was alarmed about was going into 2020, the 2025 legislative session. One of the things I noticed was we were talking about a lot of these concerns about what's going on with our rural hospitals. And then in the budget cuts, amongst them was some of the actual state's healthcare dollars going into this. So at the same time, when we're worrying about what's going on the federal level, here at the state level, we're even going after some of those cuts as well. And those were, last I checked, they were part of the ultimate budget that was signed by the governor. And so one of the things that I tend to notice, and I think Eric might be familiar with this as well, is that the House Republicans, year after year, they propose a budget, and they always do what they can to avoid any cuts at all. And year after year, it gets rejected. And so they do it not just to present something, but to also show that there is an option and a different path. And so I think part of it is pursuing that alternative path that here on the state, there might be something going on at the federal level, but as state legislators, there isn't. We don't have direct control of the federal government, but what we can do is make sure that on the state level, we're not cutting funds for healthcare. And so I think that that's probably the number one goal, is to make sure that we're not overspending on the state level so that we don't have to come back and make cuts to our state healthcare.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pratt.
Yeah, this comes back to sort of where I come at this as a son, because I know that healthcare, especially in our district, is so important to our aging population. We know that that's critical, so that they can move through their most golden years of life with comfort in their community. That said, we need to fund it. We need to make sure that every budget coming out of the legislature funds and makes up fully the requirements of these communities. I was a little concerned on reading the budgets coming out of the 2025 and how there was some severe cuts to Medicaid funding coming out of that. But we also had a net increase overall in the budget. So I think we're going the wrong direction if that's how we're budgeting in the legislature. So I'd like to see a balanced approach with priority to funding for rural hospitals and healthcare systems. I think it's time to get creative, maybe reach across the aisle to the Republicans. I know the Democrats hold the majority in the legislature, but they really need to reach across the aisle and get a better grasp of this, because I think some of the frameworks that have been put in place or that have been provided by Republican legislatures are critical to maintaining good health care moving forward for our aged populations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bernbaum.
Thank you. So I'm going to break this into three different buckets in terms of things that I'd like to see us do. The first are one-off policies that would genuinely make a difference for rural healthcare. Right now, there's a real challenge in making delivering babies something that hospitals can afford to do. Rural hospitals lost $22 million over the last year delivering on low volume labor and delivery services. One very simple initial thing we can do is to say that these services aren't going to be taxed. So I will be pushing for a B&O tax cut on rural obstetrics in the upcoming session. There's also loopholes that we helped close in the last legislative session that Big Pharma were pushing to limit something called the 340B program. I'd be happy to talk about this in more detail if anybody would like, but it's an important source of support for rural hospitals across the state. Labor costs are the primary driver post-COVID of budgetary shortfalls for hospitals across the state, but in particular for rural hospitals. One thing that we should be pursuing, and I'm working with a stakeholder group with Andrew Angle, a Republican from Eastern Washington, is putting together a rural nursing specialty track. That's one way for us to lower some of these costs across the labor spectrum. We also need to do more to replace locums with more qualified and also less compensated local providers. Finally, we should be advocating for a statewide EMR, electronic medical record. This is a way for us to reduce burden on smaller healthcare providers across the state. This is another policy that I'm working on.
Okay, thank you. Next question, how will you address declining enrollment and budget challenges facing rural school districts? Mr. Pratt, we'll start with you. You have 90 seconds.
This is a great question, one that's close to my heart and sort of, again, connects me to one of my central components, a father. I've got two kids well, my daughter just graduated. My son is still in public school. And I'll be honest, in talking with a lot of other parents about the enrollment issues, there's been a lot of people considering removing their kids. I know a lot of parents who have removed their kids. I've had to make my own adjustments with how my kids interact with public schools. And I think it comes down to this. There is a cynical, a feeling of cynicism coming from OSPI and sort of the way Washington State has handled dividing parents from the schools themselves. So recentering the parent as one of the primary stakeholders and contributors to a child's education is going to be critical to stopping people from removing themselves from schools or their children from schools and getting a sort of family connection back at the head rather than administrative concerns about how the business is done. We need to put education back at the forefront of OSPI's mission. If we do that through legislative policy, and we make sure that is central, I think we can do a lot to bring about more enrollment in Washington State.
Thank you, Mr. Bernbaum.
I think this is a really tough problem, and I have a lot of answers off the top of my head that I can give you on the last one. I don't for this one. I can talk to you about a couple changes that I think would make a difference. We need to fix regionalization in our state. It's a scheme that disproportionately allocates dollars to higher income urban school districts and away from rural school districts. I think it's morally wrong, and I am actively involved in a group of legislators to change that. But there's a bigger question here, which is why is it that Washington State, which has had a significant increased allocation to the K-12 system post-McCleary, has seen both our absolute and relative rankings, education rankings decline? I don't have a great answer to that question yet. I wish I did. I talk to teachers, I talk to administrators in our school districts, I talk to students. I'm still in the process of figuring out what it is that we need to do. I think some of the things that we should be looking at are the types of enrichment programs that exist. I think one of the challenges is that we've seen a winnowing of the types of opportunities on the peninsula that kids have. I know that for me, high school debate was something that was really important. It gave me a sense of confidence that I didn't have before. I'm not a particularly athletic kid. I don't know if anyone can tell from this that I've been more of a nerd than a jock through most of my life. But we want to make sure that kids, no matter who you are, whether it's music or academics, no matter what extracurricular activity is, that you have that opportunity to find your confidence. And we're seeing those programs close. So there are small things we can do, but I don't think that we've cracked the bigger puzzle yet. I haven't heard that policy solution.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Thank you. This is something I feel like I'm very familiar with as a recent student. And what I can say is that I have two big thoughts on this that I think can act as solutions. First of all, is we have a portion of the key, I think, here in the Port Angeles School District. One of the things that I regularly see is they're talking about the declining enrollment across the physical schools, but our online school, Seaview Academy, seems to be a real beacon of hope for the district. Being able to attract students statewide, it really helps with our local students. We've even attracted some students out of state. And so I think that that's one thing, is kind of changing the traditional approach towards education that really gives students a unique opportunity. It allowed me to do things like work through my regular high school years while maintaining a very good education. And so I think that's the one thing. Another thing is similar to what Adam said, but I think I propose a different solution. When talking about the regionalization, I think it affects students in the worst way possible. The Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education, talked about how separation based on race can create feelings of inferiority that can lead to different outcomes and unfairness. I think separation based on poverty does exactly that as well. And so focusing in on allowing a bit of school choice. And I remember a lot of people were concerned about what that means. What I want is for our public schools to compete with the other public schools. The best of the public schools we have will compete with the worst, and the best schools will produce the best results for our students. And so I think focusing in on that is probably the best solution, a balance, but not just open school choice.
Okay, thank you. The next set of questions are regarding taxes and budgets. Washington faces ongoing budget pressures. What spending would you reduce to balance the next budget? And try to be specific. Mr. Bernbaum, you have 90 seconds to answer.
Thanks. This is a great question. So I serve on the Early Learning and Human Services Committee, and inside of that bucket, I can tell you that there is no meaningful long-term performance evaluation that we do when we're sending adults with disabilities between residential, that there's sort of really serious institutional settings called RHCs. There's one level lower called SOLAs, one level lower called adult family homes. You can have a pretty similar diagnosis, very different level of cost, and end up in any one of these three places. I could give comparable examples in the healthcare space. So one of the first things that we need to do is make sure that there are meaningful efficiency metrics that we attach to the appropriation that we do, the appropriations that we have inside of our budget. This isn't, I would be lying to you if I told you that there's like one specific program or policy that we can point to, and it's like, yeah, that's where all the money is being wasted. I think it's a bigger and more chronic issue, which is that our budgets are kind of these big taped together things. They're very reactive. We respond to problems, and it's challenging to take a step back and say, when we look at the overall distribution of how our money is spent, where should it go? So I think that thinking about efficiency, in particular, when we're looking at DSHS, when we're looking at Medicaid and instead healthcare, if we're delivering comparable services, if there are similar providers of wraparound services, for example, in the SUD space, are we seeing the same quality of outcomes or not? We need to at least answer those questions if we're going to be able to have a thoughtful, rationalized budget.
Thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. And the first thing I'll start with is the overassuming each session. Each session where the legislature is allowed to assume a certain percent in increase in revenues, and year after year it intentionally assumes the maximum amount of spending. So we're intentionally saying how much do we have, how much do we expect to get, and then let's assume we get the absolute max we're allowed to by state law. And so what we do is we continuously take that and then go ahead and spend that, and then we wonder why we don't have the money to pay for everything and pay for services. In 2024, I remember receiving the letter from the official offices of our legislators at the time, Mike Chapman, Steve Theringer, and Kevin Vanderweg, and they were stating how we had a budget surplus. I wonder what happened that year, because we had, I believe it was a $1.2 billion budget surplus. Someone can fact check and correct me on that. And then the following year, we ended up with a $15 billion budget deficit. So I genuinely don't know how we come up with that number and that difference over the course of just a single year. And so we went into 2025 with a massive budget deficit. And so while we're focusing on that, I think the first thing we need to do is stop the increase in assumed spending and start being somewhat conservative with how we spend our money. Once what we really need to focus on is stopping the bleeding, so that once the budget kind of halts, then from there we can slow down how much we increase in spending, so we can let the economy catch up. And that'd be my number one focus when it comes to addressing a lot of our budget issues.
Thank you. Mr. Pratt?
Yes, thank you for the awesome question. I think accountability for state systems would go a long ways. That's a blanket statement, very difficult to get granular on. For me, for somebody who's sort of just been a regular citizen for so long. But I'm going to say this. I know that we've recently seen crazy costs for some of the liability that the state has had to incur from DCYF. And I think those are the sorts of things that we can bring under control pretty readily. I mean, when we are paying out damages in excess of 300 million at such huge amounts, we can take a big chunk of budget to pay for other things if we can eliminate that liability. Now, that's DCYF is one of the primary problems for the state's liabilities and payouts. We've got a whole host of others that come after that. So weeding out that is going to go a long way to help offset some of those, some of the fall behinds that we've got in our budget. So I think right there we can do a lot. As far as what it takes sort of to address other agencies, I think we're going to have to address accountability. You know, we've really got to get down and dirty with the numbers and accounting to try and weed out where waste is occurring and eliminate it.
Yeah, thank you. Do you support reform of current timber tax regulations to distinguish family forest from corporate REITs? Would you bring tribes, fishing communities, and the public to the table as partners? Please explain your position. Mr. Hamilton, you have 90 seconds to answer.
Okay, going through that question, who would I bring to the table? I would bring everybody to the table. I don't see a reason why we can't bring excuse me, why we can't bring everybody to the table. And so I would want to work with everybody that I absolutely could. We have a lot of people out here on the Olympic Peninsula who are very invested in this issue, people who are very familiar with it. One of the things about being a legislator is you're not going to be an expert on every issue, and it's important to acknowledge when you're not, because otherwise I feel like you're lying to the public. And so this isn't my issue where I'm the number one person for this issue, but we have a lot of people who are experts in this field. And so bringing everybody to the table and kind of do consensus building, I feel like that's a large part of the legislator's job is first, don't pretend like you know things you don't, and then work on consensus building, because I mean that's a large part of what you're doing there is you're casting votes, but you're also doing constituency building and working together. And so that would be my primary focus is again is sitting down with people. But I would say that with my interactions with them, as much as I've had, I would say that our partners in the tribes, they're very familiar with the concerns and what we need to do there. And so I think I would try to lean on them because they're very familiar with this issue. So I'll get the rest of my time back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pratt?
It's a great question. And all it can do for me is lead to more questions because this isn't a subject that I'm strong on. We have timberlands. My father was part of it back a long time ago. He used to take care of the radio systems for logging companies throughout the Olympic Peninsula, from Forks all the way down the canal, all around. And I know from living here, being born here, and existing amongst my neighbors, how important it is. That also counts for the tribes and any public interests that we have. Getting all of them to the table makes sense. But as far as what the right path to do for this, I'm just nothing but questions on that one. And I would have to seek counsel from the stakeholders themselves before I could even approach to understand this specific issue. So that is the extent of my knowledge on that.
All right, Mr. Bernbaum.
Well, I think we did a little bit on this in the last session. Theringer ran a bill that modified the treatment of some forest lands that were being bought by DNR and counties to try to create more parity. I would need to know more about the specifics of what's being proposed. I don't know enough about the specific rates, and I'm not a subject matter expert on setting timber rates. So I can talk through how I would think through this from a stakeholdering perspective. I would reach out to the Department of Natural Resources as well as our tribal partners on the peninsula. I would also reach out to the Nature Conservancy. They do a lot of work on the kind of enviro conservation side, and I would reach out to the Land Trust. They also do a lot of work in this space. With industry, I would talk to the American Forest Resource Council and the Washington Forest Protection Association. These are all groups that I work with regularly in my capacity on the Ag and Natural Resource Committee, and also because they represent a lot of business interests and a lot of constituents on the peninsula. I think that whenever you're talking about a question where you're changing the taxation rates, you have to think about the recipients. So who the recipients of the revenue. So are we talking about a change that would have something to do that could in any way implicate the DNR trust beneficiaries? If we're just talking about the stability or the competitiveness of these firms with regard to each other, then we should also talk to the mills and we should talk to the end users of forest products when we think about tax rates. So that's very briefly how I would begin to think through that problem or that question.
Thank you. Very specific question. Would you support a dedicated real estate excise tax to fund local affordable housing projects, allowing multifamily tax exemptions for low population counties? Mr. Pratt, 90 seconds.
I would not support any additional taxation on our district of that type. I think we are suffering, the public at large, our cost of living, sort of the broader impacts of our already ever increasing taxation rates, affecting every part of our lives and trickling down downstream from our most wealthy to our lower incomes. We're all being taxed too much. And so I'm a no on additional excise taxes in that regard. I think if we're looking to fund social services, we've got a lot of revenue, that we've got problems. OFM has obviously made that apparent with some of their recent releases. But I think if we're going to look toward funding some social programs, we look within the budget as it sits without additional taxation on the Washington public and our district. I don't think anybody at this point in time where we see such rising costs of living, houses are out of reach from middle class families in homes in communities they grew up in. I don't think that's prudent at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bernbaum.
So the way I'm thinking about this question is, do we want to have a REIT increase? Usually these are on the way this is structured is that it's a tax on some of the more expensive homes. And would we want to create a tax like that and then direct it towards some type of multifamily housing support for poorer counties? I feel a little bit of ambivalence about this proposal, in part because I don't know truthfully enough offhand about the way any specific increase in REIT would change the likelihood of developers building more multifamily housing. So I think that we should be cautious and think through just the viability of multifamily housing developers and whether or not this type of increase might end up working against itself, right? Because if you're making multifamily housing, it's probably a larger, more expensive housing project that it would be applied to. But with that being said, I wouldn't be a hard no on a policy like that. I think that there's a way to make it work. I think that we should talk and take a look at some of the document recording fees, which really do make it expensive and challenging when people are buying new homes. And I would see if there's some type of deal that we could strike where maybe we could reduce some of these other document recording fees that are going toward providing services that are, in my opinion, somewhat bloated in exchange for that type of multifamily housing support. I do think we need more tax credits to incentivize denser housing. So that was kind of a politician half answer. Do with that do with that what you will.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, so I think I accidentally answered this earlier in a way. It's death by a thousand cuts, and so looking for new ways to levy more taxes on people it's not the right answer. I mean, in this case, more taxes on businesses and higher income individuals. In this case, is effectively asking us to start going after our businesses to save our smaller, lower income areas, and that's just not the solution. And so thinking about this. People also, they're not necessarily looking to share a home with several other families. I mean, I'm thinking about it here. I don't think a mom and a dad deciding where they want to raise their kids, they decide that they want to share the same building with three other families. And also for our builders, the bang for the buck isn't there. A lot of the times they bring it down to like for per square foot, it is financially more reasonable for them to build a single family home than it is to build a multifamily home. And so often we have to face issues like that. And I think the first thing is that families prefer single family homes and builders prefer to build those. And so finding ways to make that more economically reasonable is the best thing to do there. And so we need to go through some of the existing regulations on housing in order to make it more affordable. There's a lot of stuff that we've kind of introduced over the years that we might have believed at the time would have been environmentally friendly. And then in some cases, it just doesn't turn out to be so. And that's not anybody's fault. It just happens. You don't get what you expected. And so the best thing to do there is kind of go through, find what we implemented that didn't work out the way we hoped to, and cut what doesn't work and keep what works.
Thank you. The next group of questions will focus on climate and natural resource management. This will be your first yes/no response. It's a very straightforward question. Do you support the Climate Commitment Act? Mr. Bernbaum, yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Hamilton?
No.
Mr. Pratt?
No.
Right. Thank you. That was easy. Okay. Given the major policy changes at the federal level, how can the state do more to promote green energy initiatives and strategies to counteract climate change? Mr. Hamilton, you have 90 seconds.
Sorry, real quick, could you repeat the question? My computer kind of glitched out.
Yes, given the major policy changes at the federal level, how can the state do more to promote green energy initiatives and strategies to counteract climate change?
Right. Okay. So the first thing that I kind of think too is hydroelectric dams. That's just in my mind. That's like part of what we in Washington State are known for in a way, because it's something somewhat unique to our state. And so taking advantage of that form of natural resource is my first thought for how we take care of climate change, just simply because it's something that is readily available. And so investing in that is my first thought. And another thing too is that there is a lot of policy changes on the federal level, but ultimately we still have to work with the federal government. And I would simply state that working with the federal government is probably one of the other things that I would really want to do, because ultimately, I mean, just thinking about it, I know that we live in a hyper politicized environment, but the environmental department on the federal level was founded under a Republican president, Richard Nixon. And so I know a lot of people are really worried about what's going on there. But I think that's one of the first things we have to do is recognize that while there might be some partisanship that people are worried about, that we can still work with the federal government on an issue like this. I mean, even thinking about it just on the state level, a lot of our environmental policies during the 1970s was also taken care of under a Republican governor, Dan Evans. And so again, working with the federal government and then pursuing hydroelectric dams, that would be my answer for environmental policy there.
Thank you. Mr. Pratt?
Yeah, there we go. So partnerships are going to be key to this, and striking a balance between, the needs of Washington State citizens, Legislative District 24 citizens, and the environment. And so I think partnerships with private industry for green technology growth in our area is going to be important. I know the state recently has made several sort of strides legislatively to try and help fusion technology and some of the things some of the advancements in nuclear technologies. And I think that's the right direction to go here. Being that hydroelectric dams and things are basically our bread and butter when it comes to, well, our energy, our inexpensive energy. And if we're going to start phasing those out, we need to make sure we have the right set of circumstances. And I think the private industry and encouraging growth is going to be critical there. So if we're looking at saying, okay, the federal government is no longer going to help us along, then we have to find a new partner. And if that means reaching out to private industry stakeholders uh, and building and encouraging them around here through lower taxation and adopting regulation authorities that are manageable for them and that draw them into our area.
Thank you. Mr. Bernbaum?
Washington State is last in the nation in terms of our ability to develop wind power and solar power. It is almost impossible to have new transmission here. Last session, I sponsored a bill, the Senate companion of which was passed, that created a transmission authority. This is kind of a long-term looking thing, but I'm going to run through a handful of things that we could do right now that would make a huge difference. First, we need to reform FSEC. That's the statewide single permitter for transmission, as well as for some particularly challenging energy projects. We should have shortened panels. We should have a smaller panel that has less input from some local government stakeholders that take a long time to coordinate. We need to have permit appeal reform that to help limit some of the endless appeals. There's a lot of NIMBYism. People agree that we need to have battery storage. They agree we need to have solar panels, but they say not in my backyard. We have to have political leadership that can say, hey, we need that there has to be a statewide plan where these things can move forward. Right now, that is just not happening. One way to do that is for us to create go zones. We should have statewide mapping. This is one of the things that they did in Texas. ERCOT created a renewable energy transmission corridor that unlocked a huge amount of renewable energy development there. They are now the single largest developer of renewable energy in the nation. We should have categorical exemptions to SEPA for reconductoring wind, for repowering wind turbines, from reconductoring high transmission power lines. We should have GMA reform that makes it harder for us to have overlays that prevent you from building wind power and solar power in different communities. There's a huge amount of work for us to do here, and I'm looking forward to continue to work on it. I would love to keep talking about this with you guys, but I'll shut my trap.
DNR managed lands and water can be monetized. Carbon sequestration is an example. Do you support giving the Department of Natural Resources the ability to generate income for trust beneficiaries, such as the Department of Education, by selling those services? Mr. Pratt, you have 90 seconds. Sorry.
That's all right. I was like, is that me? Is she asked? Yes. So, I mean, that's a piece of legislation that it's put forth should be looked at. I don't see why a study on that is a problem. This is land. We should put it to good use. If it can generate revenue and help the state, that's something that should be explored. But I think that's a really broad question to answer with my limited sort of viewport on this. I'd have to see a specific piece of legislation, kind of get down granular into it to really understand its impact on our district, on the DNR, on lands, and if it's worth it, and whether or not the right balance is being struck between, the environmental need and the public interest and our stewardship over these resources. So it's a bit of a tricky question from my standpoint. I'm sure there's people that are much more savvy on that, but really the legislation needs to be put in front of me before I can really say with any certainty, yes or no, would I support something like that? So okay, thanks for the question.
Mr. Bernbaum.
I think that so there are two competing proposals that I've seen that try to do this. People refer to them as ecosystem services bills. Man, I honestly go back and forth about it. I'd like to. I'm going to explain a little bit about some of my skepticism. I agree broadly with what Eric said. I think it's something that obviously we should think about. There are clear reasons why we ought to consider doing this. If there are ways for us to generate revenue from underperforming parcels of land on the trust while pursuing our conservation goals, of course we can do that. But the devil's in the details. So to give one example, there actually has been a study of what this would look like in our district. I don't know if you recall, earlier on I was mentioning CRTC. So CRTC buys Western Hemlock which at least in one of the bills that was proposed would be modeled basically as junk wood. So the value of the credits that would be sold for taking that Western hemlock off the market is a small fraction of what CRTC pays for it when they're producing these kind of more advanced timber products. One thing we don't want to do is lock in a lower rate by selling off some parcels of land that actually have in it that a more innovative forest product space could end up utilizing. But we could undercut that market by adopting this policy.
Let's go ahead, Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, real quick, could you repeat the question?
Yes. DNR managed lands and water can be monetized. Carbon sequestration is an example. Do you support giving DNR the ability to generate income for trust beneficiaries, such as the Department of Education, by selling those services?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what Eric and Adam said is kind of correct in so much as, again, I guess broad questions get broad answers. We can't necessarily say yes, absolutely, or heck no. And so I think my focus would be on what individual cases. Obviously, we want underperforming land to start yielding some benefits to the state, because I think in a lot of cases, I believe, as you briefly mentioned before, in a lot of cases that this will help support a lot of our local taxing, junior taxing districts. And so I think that's something to be weighed in on, as well as what is the benefit for the local community. Obviously, we don't want to do something that would be environmentally unfriendly. Obviously, our peninsula is a beautiful place, and we don't want to just turn around and wreck what we've so graciously been given. And so what I really want to focus on there is what can we do to start turning over some revenue that can start helping our junior taxing districts, especially places like our local school districts. And so that would be my number one focus there. But again, broad question, hard to get specific without an individual example. So I'll just yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This is a 30-second short answer from each of you. Do you support data centers in District 24? What regulations would you propose and why? Mr. Bernbaum, you have 30 seconds.
I think that until we have some type of statewide framework that prevents climate degradation and that prevents the transfer of costs to ratepayers from data centers, we shouldn't support them here. At the same time, if there is an opportunity for us to build a data center that doesn't have any of those impacts, a huge if there, right? If we can find a way to do that, we shouldn't say categorically no. I don't think that I've seen a proposal that I feel comfortable with yet, though. Okay,
thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, so I think that there might be some people who are concerned about this, and I just kind of want to ease them off a little bit, especially here for the 24th. It just doesn't make sense for our area. Just geographically, we're just not, I don't think we're really in the position to really be set up for it. It doesn't make sense to me in large part. But again, I don't want to necessarily say no to proposal. If someone could bring to me a proposal that works for everybody in the peninsula, then that'd be great. But off the top of my head, I don't think it necessarily makes sense for the peninsula. So I'd kind of be just off the top of my head a no on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pratt.
That's a tough one, because I mean, we shouldn't eliminate any potential, especially if there is a benefit to our local communities. Energy generation, obviously a huge concern when it comes to these. I know everybody's concerned with the environmental impact, but to just say that they should or should not be in our district, I think would be myopic in placing such a limitation at this point. I don't really support them, but at the same time, I don't want to eliminate a potential source of revenue.
All right. Another 30-second short answer question. Would you support a statewide moratorium on battery farms or support permitting reforms? Mr. Hamilton.
This is this is something that I'm just not quite familiar with, so I'd have to look into that. But that's not an issue I'm familiar with. So all I can say is that people have access to my email publicly, so start flooding my email with information on this subject because I'd want to know more about it, but I couldn't give you an answer right now.
All right, thank you. Mr. Pratt?
Sorry, I'm still unmuted. Battery farms. I think that any industrial applications like this needs to be handled in balance with the communities they'll be within. Again, if we're looking for technologies that are going to help support green energy solutions, I don't think you should omit something like this. Like there's going to be potential, there's going to be danger, there's going to be an impact of anything that has to do with energy generation or storage, and you just have to consider that in balance. So I would say that that's a tough question to answer just on its face with the given information, but I don't want to limit our potential.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bernbaum?
I'm actively opposed to a statewide moratorium on battery energy storage systems. I think that we need to have a thoughtful framework for them. It's one of the downsides to renewable energy generation is that it's cyclical during the day. When the sun's up, you get a lot of solar power. When the wind is blowing, you get a lot of wind power. If we want to meaningfully hit any of our statewide greenhouse gas emission reductions, we need to have battery storage. This is a technology that a lot of places are doing well. Some places are doing poorly. And I think that we should step up to the challenge and find a way to permit safe battery storage so we can move away from fossil fuel dependent energy production.
All right, thank you. Okay, the next set of questions focus on immigration. Concisely explain the benefits immigration brings to the United States. Mr. Pratt, you have 90 seconds.
Diversity in all of our ways and thoughts in our lines of thinking. I mean, immigration adds to when it's done, within lawful means and with welcome arms to people from around the world. It just adds to our general, I would say, social intelligence in a lot of ways. Our relationship with with countries around the globe. Washington in particular and its connection with the tech sector can show that there is deep and important relationships with having immigration as a key component to our community. I think you can't really underestimate. I mean, even our country as a whole is a country of immigrants. So making sure that continues, making sure that it's done within lawful means, and making sure that it's done so with stewardship in mind is an amazing thing and a strength in our long-term success. I think it's amazing, and I enjoy meeting people in my job that are from all walks of life. I tend to meet them from all over. I just met a gentleman from Prague. It was a truck driver, and he was just so happy that he'd been given a visa to work. And seeing that and knowing that exists in our way of life is an amazing thing.
Thank you. Mr. Bernbaum?
I think that immigration is, well, it's the heart of our national identity. I think that it's the thing that makes America American, right? That's what's most unique about this place, is that there isn't one American culture. American culture comes from a whole bunch of other cultural strands that come together. American Jews eat Chinese food on Christmas. That's not a Jewish thing. That's an American thing. All the other examples that are coming to mind are culinary, which is one of the downsides of these short format answers. So like I just truly think that it is at the heart of who we are. I think that America is at its best when we are open to different people from different places. I think that that's the part of America that I feel most proud of, that we do have a culture that changes, that incorporates things from different people. I also think that immigrants are a really important part of our economy. They're the backbone of the agricultural sector in Washington state. You could not have Washington farm economy without without certain visa immigrants coming over for short stays. Immigrants are incredibly important to the technology sector. They're important to our higher ed sector. They're important to our universities. I think that one of the most disappointing elements of the political climate that we're in right now is that there's so much rhetoric that tries to isolate individual groups of people and point to them as enemies. And I think that this is wrong. I think that we should judge people based on their contributions to society, not some thin categorization of where they came from.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, I think me and Adam probably both skipped dinner because my first thought was also food too. But I think when it comes to talking about the value that immigrants bring to our country, is that everyone brings something to the table when they come to the United States. And overall, what happens with cultures once they start to blend is we start getting new and interesting things. And I think ultimately what we have in the United States is we have people who bring something new to the table, and then we kind of blend it together and create something new in many cases. And so I think that that's ultimately the great value is that there is a shared American identity ultimately built around, obviously, our founding documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, which have existed for 250 years here pretty soon. And so thinking to that, it is what these cultures and these individuals bring to the table towards the shared goal of individual liberty and freedom that's really in large part made America great, because people want to share in the value of what has made America so great. And so obviously the importance and the benefits of immigration can't be overstated. And yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it. I'll just give the rest of my time back.
Okay, thank you. Do you agree with how the immigration system is currently being managed at the federal level? Two-part question. And what legislative reforms do you support at the state level, if any? Mr. Bernbaum, you have 90 seconds.
I do not agree with what's going on at the federal level with immigration reform. And I think that there's a number of policies that we passed in the last session that have tried to push back against that. I guess I want to pin one thing, which is there's a limit to what we can do in Washington State. A commitment that I had in the last legislative session and that I will carry forward is to continue to advocate for policies and support whatever policies we can that will protect the immigrant community on the Olympic Peninsula from the overreach of ICE. I try to not be ideological. This to me is just like a moral bright line. That's a commitment that I have, and that's how I voted in the last legislative session. That's how I'm going to continue to vote. I think that whatever we can do to prevent, continuing to support the Keep Washington Working Act that provides protection for immigrants in a variety of workplace settings and in the receipt of services is something that I'd like to see us continue to do. I'm not a lawyer, and so I don't know the inner work. Like Washington State is actively involved in a lot of litigation with the federal government around these issues, and I'd be going way too far forward on my skis to speak to the ins and outs of those different suits. I think that that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of these protections. Like I said, on these issues, I am a little ideological. I do think that this is just the right thing for us to do, and I'm going to keep supporting the policies that people bring that allow us to protect our immigrant community.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah. So my answer, excuse me. My answer is a bit complex. There's a lot of stuff I don't like that is coming down from the federal government, and then there's some stuff that I do like. And so I think the first thing is that litigation is kind of the love language of the government, and so litigation is obviously going to be kind of exchanged back and forth. The governments are just going to try to hash this out no matter what. And so I think the first thing is there is a lot of stuff going on. It's obviously a very ideological topic. And so I think the first thing is to kind of take a step back and remind ourselves that we are state legislators. And so focusing on what we can do and what is realistic, and also what's reasonable to do. There is a lot of stuff that people want to try to do at the state level, but what we need to recognize is what they really want to see is a change in the federal level. And so having our state legislators kind of go over this, to me, we're kind of focusing on something that we're not very that in a part we shouldn't necessarily be so focused on, because it is a federal issue. And so again, allowing for the litigation, that is part of the job of the Attorney General's office, and those who want to do that. So if they want to pursue that and that they deem that that's a necessary and good use of resources, then go for it. But on the state litigation, on the state legislative issue, there's not a lot we can do, because there is what we want to see is a change on the federal level. So if you want to see a change on the federal level, then you should do that. Now, I do support some of the stuff in regards to ICE. Mostly what I want to see is just a little bit of a tone down of a lot of what's going on, because when people start to get emotional, that's when you start to get reactionary politics and reactionary policy, and it tends not to end well for anybody.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pratt.
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I'm clear on giving my answer here.
It's two-part. Do you agree with how the immigration system is currently being managed at the federal level? And then at the state level, what legislative reforms would you support, if any?
Okay. Do I agree? You would be hard pressed to find any government policy that I am 100% on. And I think that's the way America should. You should always have room for criticism. That being said, it's a federal policy position. So as a state legislator, I look at this as a state specific position. What sort of legislation would I support to sort of undo or to support our immigrants? I mean, I can't do anything to change the federal policies. So that to me is sort of a difficult question. If I'm running for a federal office, we can address that probably a little better than my candidacy as a state representative. But I would say that you can't fix it. You're going to have to look at the federal government specifically. You can create it, you can make it worse. I support the immigrants in our communities that are here lawfully. I think we need to tone down a bit of the rhetoric, creating these dividing lines. I do think that to be the case. But in reality, immigration policy over many administrations has sort of had its effect in similar ways. It's just very apparent right now. And I know everybody's really sensitive to it. So it's a tough question to ask. As a state legislature, even tougher.
Okay, thank you. We're going to skip a couple of questions here in the interest of time, and I'm going to focus on some that are related to government elections and structures. So, Hella, this is question number 16. This is a yes, no, 10-second response. Will you support legislation that limits money in elections by redefining corporations and other artificial entities so as to strip them of their legal power to spend money on state elections? A mouthful. Mr. Pratt, yes or no?
Would I strip corporations of their authority?
Of their legal power to spend money on state elections.
Would I strip corporations' legal power on their to contribute money into state elections? No, I don't think that's reasonable. I mean, you could always find room to put checks and balances on influence like that. I think that's definitely something that's manageable, something worth exploring. But I can't say right out the gate without seeing the actual nuts and bolts of some sort of policy like that. I can't say yay or nay on that.
All right, Mr. Bernbaum?
Yeah, if we can get the details right, I'm just going to take the other half of Eric's answer, I guess, but say yes. If I think that if we can pull the influence of corporations and other special interests out of politics, we'd have a much better state. Too much is dictated by corporations and unions and activists who are way out on the fringe, way outside of what the public wants. And we got to do what we can to check this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
So I have a similar answer in so much as I want to see what the proposal is, but I'm not opposed to the idea because what I will say is nobody similar situation, nobody liked in large part Citizens United because people feel like it kind of drowns out their voice. This scene to my generation, it feels like it's just the easiest thing ever. Citizens United was very weird, but my initial response is we do want to limit it because I am to a degree tired of seeing politics where if you can't raise $250,000, your campaign is worthless.
All right, thank you. This is also a yes/no 10-second response. Will you support legislation for state and local level ranked choice voting? Mr. Bernbaum, yes or no?
Yeah, but this is another one of these like yes, but there's a lot of stuff that we need to make sure we get right about this. Like, there's really no better way for us to reduce people's confidence in elections than to implement a policy like that and for it not to work. So yes, it's something we should keep working on. Councilmanic action, let city councils or county commissions experiment with it. With study, yes, but big asterisks next to my other.
Okay, Mr. Hamilton?
Off the top of my head, I don't think I would, simply because it makes the system quite complicated and it would make a lot of people worried. I think what we really need to be focusing on is kind of bringing more people into the process. What I can simply say is just personally from running for office, the election process looks very weird, very hard, but once you get on the inside of it, you become so much more familiar with it. And so I would say ranked choice voting will just make things harder for a lot of people, and I think we'll mess it up if we try it.
Okay, Mr. Pratt?
I would be a no on that. I don't think ranked choice voting is prudent in our on our sort of the way we do business in our elections. I mean, there is a caveat always that every proposal can be considered, but it has to be presented before you can really chew on it, understand, and then digest it to make a decision. But I would be a no, a quick 10-second no on that.
Okay. All right. One more 10-second response. Do you believe in the separation of church and state? Mr. Hamilton?
So I do think that there's a part where you have to be prudent on like what do the people want, but ultimately it's not necessarily stated in our Constitution. It was mentioned in letters to the Danbury Baptists. I believe I have the correct people from the President of the United States at the time, Thomas Jefferson. And so what he was specifically saying was that no, we will not have a church religion, not necessarily that religious principles can't influence government. That's never been a part of the United States.
Are you a yes or a no?
I do not support the separation of church and state as traditionally referenced.
Okay. Mr. Pratt?
So do I support the separation of
Do you
churches?
believe in the separation of church and state as a
Do
legislator?
I believe in it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Potential
I mean,
legislator.
yeah, as a legislator, it's the people who are influencing and whose voice I need to be resonating. And, you know, they will come with different value sets, and that's fine. They could be based in faith or whatnot, but theirs is the voice that I carry, not any entity outside of those individuals.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Bernbaum?
Yes, I support the separation of church and state.
Okay. All right. Next question. How should the state balance tribal sovereignty with local government concerns of land use, taxation, and public service? Mr. Pratt, you're first on this one. 90 seconds.
And tribal sovereignty, to me, is defined, well, it just is defined by the treaties with the federal government. We have to be respectful. There's no getting through that. I wouldn't want to change that position. But that being said, I think we should look at this relationship more as neighbors. rather than purely contractual or adversarial. I think that is important in this case. So tribal sovereignty, absolutely support it in the sense that I wouldn't want somebody taking away my own sovereignty, and I would extend that ethical belief that they have, their rights that they've come to, the federal government has made contracts with through treaties, and so I would respect that wholeheartedly. And as neighbors, we just have to coexist. So our environment, our resources, the things we share, and how they're managed, it's important to do that with a sort of a co-interest at every turn. And I hope that comes back too. And I think that's important to engender in our relationships with them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bernbaum.
So first, tribes are sovereign nations, and as sovereign nations, there's a fundamentally government-to-government relationship that they have with Washington State. And so the role of the legislature is subordinate to the role of the executive when we're talking about intertribal relationships. So one challenging part of making sure that we are having appropriate, fully consultative relationships with our tribes is following the lead of the governor. Truthfully, it's ensuring that at that level of government, that relationship occurs. As a state legislator in the 24th LD, we represent more tribes than any other legislative district in the state. So I spend a whole lot of time, and I'm going to continue to spend a whole lot of time talking to tribal partners. These are the tribal governments locally are working with county government, city government as healthcare partners. They're partnering on criminal justice matters. They're partnering on natural resource. We need to make sure that communication happens early and often. The consultation meaningfully occurs when I'm introducing legislation, when other legislators are introducing it. That's a responsibility that I take seriously, and it's communication that I'm engaged in regularly, both during the interim and throughout session. I don't think that there's a single right way, because there's a formal protocol way to do this between the executive and the tribes. As legislators, it's something that you really do need to figure out on your own. And I think it's important. I think it's also a place where investing in relationships and being thoughtful really matters.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that when it comes to working in government, you always have to deal with what your predecessors have done, either in larger positions or even in the offices that you're seeking. And so the first thing I would simply state is that promise made, promise kept. I don't want to reverse anything that we've taken care of already, any agreements that people have made in the past. And so obviously I'm also referring to the stuff with the federal government. The federal government has a lot of power with this issue. And so working with them government to government is obviously the first thing that I would simply say is we want to work together. When it comes to, I want to give people a little bit of background to what informs my opinion, because in this circumstance, I think that's important, because you can't necessarily guarantee what will happen. So I think knowing what helps somebody come to the conclusions they do is probably the best thing I can give. And so I'll just refer to a friend of mine. He gets paid $25 an hour. He's got healthcare, he's got dental, he's got eyesight, he's got everything. And would you believe if I told you that he works at a gas station? And so what kind of informs my opinion here is that they are an amazing partner, because in some cases they provide some of the best jobs locally. And so I automatically by default do just have a tremendous amount of respect for the tribes, because they have been a tremendous partner. Maybe there's some tension on the state level. Government to government relationships are always kind of messy sometimes, but on the individual level and on the tribal level, like individual to the tribe, we've got some tremendous relationships. And so I'd really want to lean on that. So I hope that helps people understand my thought process when I start thinking about the tribes.
All right. We're going to move on to our last set of questions dealing with personal qualifications and interest. 30-second short answer by each of you. What specific news sources do you rely on, and what's one book that's influenced you? We'll start with Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah. So For me, it's anything that is written, anything that you write down. I remember seeing a study, and people can try to look for it, that simply states that it's written media tends to be less biased, just because you're reading it in your own voice. And so when it starts to sound out of character, it tends to kind of stand out. And so written media is my favorite kind. I prefer to read it than to listen to it. And a book that influences me. It's hard to think of one off the top of my head, but
Okay, you answered the type of news sources, but we asked for the specific news sources. Where do you get your news from?
I get a lot of stuff from local media, PDN, places like that. So
Okay, great. Thank you.
it's pretty diverse. Hard to pinpoint one exactly, but preferably just written media.
All right, Mr. Pratt. I think you're muted.
There we go. What news sources do I typically use? Was that the question?
Yeah, and what book has influenced you?
Oh, well, actually, I can't think of the title recently, but I've been listening to audiobooks traveling back and forth up and down the canal. It's by F.A. Hayek, who was a post-World War II, I think he was an economist or sort of a, I guess, what philosopher, and he basically talked about the impacts of socialism coming out of Nazi Germany and sort of how that happened. Anyway, that's been an important book, but I can't for the life of me recall the name for
All right,
whatever reason.
Mr.
The
Bernbaum.
news,
Oh, do you want to answer? Go ahead.
the news source, I get them online, Facebook, X. I go all over, so I try and take as much in as I can from
All right.
broad sources.
Thank you. Mr. Bernbaum.
I read the PDN and the New York Times, kind of skim the headlines on the Times, and there's a couple Washington State politics publications that I read regularly, the State Standard and the Observer. Richard Rorty's "What Can We Hope For" really influenced me. He's like a patriotic leftist, and I think that he's got good lessons for a lot of Democrats. He says he talks about how important it is that we can articulate a positive vision for the future.
All right, thank you. All right, next question. What's your plan to be an effective legislator? What committees are you interested in and why? Mr. Pratt, you have 90 seconds.
I think representing a broader spectrum of people is important as a legislator. Um, there is such a dividing line. Obviously, the legislature is extremely, let's just put it out there, it's extremely one-sided. The Democrat caucus holds a huge majority. And I think that conservative bills, ideas, influence on policy is kept silent. And so I think encouraging a relationship to try and get more conservative ideas, that broader representation into policies in hearings, in committees is critical. I think we're moving the wrong direction if the legislature continues to sort of be lopsided or even get more so. So my goal as a legislator would be to try and find equilibrium with my Democrat counterparts, to do what's right for a broader section of our district and our state. Energy committees are one of those things that I would really like to take part in. I think that aspect of our day-to-day lives is important. As Washingtonians, we've always appreciated sort of a lower cost energy. I would really like to take part in that. I see my time is running out, so I won't expand on it, but there's really education, energy, and the budget's a little far for me, but I wouldn't mind coming to understand how we can fix that problem as well.
All right, Mr. Bernbaum.
So I'm currently serving on transportation, ag and natural resources, and early learning and human services. In this upcoming session, I plan to change from early learning and human services to healthcare. Rural healthcare is really important to me. the legislative, I really like working on a team with our legislative delegation. I'm transitioning between the two halves of the question now. One of the reasons why I was on early learning and human services, because Theringer does a great job on the healthcare committee. Now that he's retiring, that's one of the reasons why I'd like to join that committee. I think having a team mentality is important. Part of my job in Olympia is voting on bills, but that's the smallest part of it. The bigger part of it is working on the budget. It's helping local government liaise with agencies. It's being an advocate for constituents when they're dealing with government at different levels. It's helping people identify opportunities for their businesses. Um, so having that community problem-solving mentality is really important to me. That's what drew me to the role in the first place. I was a legislative assistant before I ran, and I love that. I love getting to do the constituent service work. I try to not. It is deeply important to me to not come into to conversations with my mind closed. I listen to people. I'm a Democrat. I don't think everybody in our district is a Democrat. And I think that what people want is representation that's balanced. And I think they want a legislator that can listen without judgment, that can admit when they're wrong, and that can change their mind. And that's what I've tried to do over the last 2 years. And if reelected, that's what I'm going to continue to do.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, the first thing I'd like to do is just say I don't like leaving questions unanswered. I was trying to remember the name of the book earlier. You asked what book. I would say The Socratic Method by Ward Farnworth. Very good book. But to your current question, this one always gets Republican incumbents because obviously the House Minority Leader decides ultimately which committees you go to. So this one always makes elected incumbent Republicans excited because what I say is I want education, number one. My background of being familiar with the public education system, I think would be critical and important there. And so long as they give me that, I'm willing to work with whatever they want. And so that always gets them excited because they always say appropriations for you. So pretty much fine with whatever, so long as I get that education seat in the committee. And so thinking about how to be effective in the role as a legislator, the first thing I would say is that obviously because Democrats hold a majority in Olympia, you have to work with Democrats just to be a successful legislator. And so my first thought is there are 8 Democrats who I would characterize as heroes for what they did in Olympia, which was they voted against party line and they voted against the income tax. They did what I think was right, and one of them even pointed out that this is likely going to turn into something similar to the federal income tax, which is it's going to say it's only for the rich, and then we're going to remove the threshold. There was an amendment to make it only hit millionaires, and they killed that amendment as well. And so those 8 legislators who voted against the income tax, those would be the first relationships I'd want to cultivate, because I would say voting against your party when it's hard makes you a hero.
All right. Thank you. That concludes our question segment. We managed to cover all the questions except for 3, so thank you for that. So candidates, it's now time for your closing statements. They'll be in the opposite order of your opening statement. Candidate Aiden Hamilton, you now have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Yeah, so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I simply just want to state that I hope you not only just understand where I stand on some of the issues, but also kind of understand some of my perspective, what will inform me. Sometimes we'll be faced with issues in the legislature that we simply didn't get to talk about, and you just have to hopefully trust the individual that you send to Olympia. And so I hope that you know me a little bit better, and I hope over the course of the rest of the campaign that you'll become familiar with me and what I kind of think, how I approach issues. That way you can personally know what I'm willing to do. And above all, what I want to say is that I hope that you can walk away going, even if I don't vote for him, that I can feel confident in his ability to perform the job of a state legislator if elected. And so that's what I hope above all else. So again, I just want to repeat, I thank everybody so much for being here. I thank my opponents for being here. And I hope you walk away with some confidence in our electoral process, no matter who you vote for. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Adam Bernbaum.
I echo Aiden's thanks both to the people who are listening here on Zoom and on the radio, as well as the organizers of the forum. I really appreciate it. I know that every one of these forums that I go to, I learn something new, and I learn about something that I don't know, something that I'm going to go look up afterward. It's always fun to hear yourself make mistakes. Maybe fun's not quite the right word. Um, but I mentioned that to say that that's the approach that I've tried to have to being a legislator. It is very important to me to listen to people and to try to incorporate their feedback into how I vote, into the policies that I advance, into what I try to appropriate in the budget. I think that politics at its most aspirational is how a community expresses itself. And the hard part about this job is that there's more people than you have time to talk to. There's no one way to know what's right and what's wrong. The answers that I've given have not necessarily been aligned with Democratic platforms. I vote against the party, and I vote with the party. I try to do the thing that, as best I can tell, is what the district wants and would help us here. And that's what I'm going to continue to do if you choose to send me back. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Eric Pratt.
Yeah, I mean, got to start with thank yous, and that is thank you for having me here. This is the first forum I've ever been a part of, and it's been a blast. And one of the things I'm taking away from this is I think there's actually a lot of agreement here. We all are community focused people. We all have different ideas about how to implement that, perhaps, but in reality, at the end of the day, we're all cooperative in a lot of what we want to see in our outcomes. We want District 24 to be successful. I want District 24 to be successful. I want to make sure that the discussions with my daughter at the dinner table include how she's going to stay here and build a life here and stay close so my grandchildren can do the same and that cycle continues. I want to be a part of that important process to bring the voice of Legislative District 24 to Olympia. And I want to join people and listen to everybody like here that's been here. And I look forward to continuing to do it if that's the case. So appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to tonight's discussion. Thank you, candidates, for your thoughtful answers. The candidates have taken the bold act of running. Now it's our turn to exercise our civic responsibility and vote no later than Tuesday, August 4th. Ballots will be mailed in mid-July the 17th. Everyone's participation is essential for a healthy democracy. If you're not sure of your voter status, registration-wise, check it on votewa.gov website. We'll state again, the form has been recorded and a link to the recording will be posted on both the League of Women Voters Clallam County website, our YouTube channel, and Facebook page in a few days. Once we have it posted, be sure to spread the word among your friends who are unable to join us live so everyone can be an informed voter. Thank you again to our candidates for participating in tonight's forum. Good evening, everyone.